Let me start to introduce our panel. We're going to be talking about building a culture of sustainability. There are certain elements for sustainability in place, but we're going to cover what is around, what are those elements, and then we're also going to talk about the larger production issues around sustainability. How do we start the dialogue? How do we engage with people? How do we actually build a culture that is going to be encouraging sustainability? So while we're waiting for the slides, very quickly, we have Emellie O'Brien. And Emellie is the founder and CEO of Earth Angel, and they are a pioneer in the sustainable filmmaking movement. And she's worked on over 100 motion pictures and television series to reduce the environmental impact since 2011. Let's see here. We have Meg. And Meg Schrock has been a rigging gaffer and best boy electric for almost 20 years. She works primarily in narrative features, episodic television, and commercials. She's been a member of Local 52 since 2009 and has recently become co-chair of the Green Committee at Local 52. I have next is Peter. And Peter Schrudner is the founder and chairman of Triode Media Group, and they're a full-service rental house and studio with stages in Pennsylvania. Triode is a member of PERG, which is the Production Equipment Rental Group, and is a proponent of developing battery solutions for location productions. And then we have Declan Quinn, ASC. And Declan is an Irish-American cinematographer and a 3-time winner of the Independent Spirit Award for Best Cinematography, who has lensed over 45 titles. He's known for his work with Jonathan Demme, Marinere, Jim Sheridan, and Mike Figgs. Declan is recently paired with Eugene Ash on Sylvia's Love, Braden King on The Evening Hour, and Tim Ferdy on Better Nate Than Ever. And he's a longtime proponent of sustainable production, and he's a member of the American Society of Cinematographers and the Irish Society of Cinematographers. Some titles that you might be familiar with that he has shot is the iconic Leaving Las Vegas, Monsoon Wedding, and Breakfast in Pluto, and Hamilton. So anyhow, this is the panel, and let's see here, guys. Do we have slides? Let's find out. And I push the magic green button, poof, and there we are. All right, so sustainability is it's a matrix. You know, it's made up of hundreds of little pieces that we do as individuals, as we do as organizations, as we do as a community. And so part of the idea of building a culture of sustainability is bringing all of these pieces together. Let's see here, Emellie, do you want to be Emellie or do you want to be EOB?
I go by EOB in a lot of production circles, so we'll go with EOB. Yeah, thanks, Michael. So what you're looking at here is a graph from the Sustainable Production Alliance, which came out in 2021. This was the first industry-wide study that was put together on what the average impact of film production is. So this is specifically a tentpole production, and when the studios aggregated all of their data, they found that on average, a tentpole film is producing about 3,370 metric tons of carbon dioxide. And when broken up by source, you can see that about 6% of that was housing, 22% was utilities, 24% was air travel, and the largest contributor was fuel, 48%. And so this is something that we see very commonly despite the type of production that we're working with here. So you'll see this with tent poles, with large large budget, medium budget, small budget productions, fuel is typically the largest contributor. That's the fuel that is going into all of our trucks that are transporting our gear and our human beings, as well as the fuel that is powering diesel generators, which I know is going to be a big topic for today. This is for episodic. You can see the average emissions per 1 hour scripted drama series, half-hour scripted single camera, half-hour scripted multi-camera, and unscripted. So unscripted is kind of like the one anomaly where fuel is not the largest contributor, which is really interesting. Air travel is the largest typically there. And then here's a sample kind of summary of what we would produce at Earth Angel. When we work with productions, we're measuring their carbon footprint and we're creating strategies to reduce that. So here's just like a sample snapshot of what we might produce at the end. So looking at zero waste, here's the overall waste diversion for that particular production, the percentage of how much waste was kept from landfills, the amount of single-use plastic water bottles avoided, the amount of fuel consumed, air miles flown, nights of occupancy for accommodations, the overall carbon footprints you can see for this particular project. Again, this is a sample. It was 2,552 metric tons, so coming in under that large tentpole number, but still substantial. What that footprint per shooting day equals to, and then we also calculate how much CO2 we helped to avoid, and then can show what the percentage of the CO2 reduction was on that particular project.
Can you point out for us what the consumption was per day in that? Is that on the chart?
Yes. So the CO2 per day in this case, because it was a 73-day shoot, was 34.9 metric tons of CO2 per shooting day. Yeah.
So that's a lot of tons per day.
Correct.
Let me just put it that way. That's substantial. So as you look at those charts, you can see that the major components are power and transportation. It's like what Meg just said. It's like running our sets, it's moving people, it's flying people, it's powering the set onto all of those things. And so what are the big elements that we have under it? It's power generation and management. This is part of the lowest hanging fruit. What can we do easily to help influence the carbon footprint? And the biggest part, since fuel is the biggest component, okay, let's take a look at the fueling issues. Under that is scaling power to lighting, because part of what you've got is you have generators that may be sitting there, they're way oversized. It's very easy for a underutilized generator to be idling through $800 a day worth of diesel, that is actually just being burned for no use whatsoever. Digital scouting to help control traveling. And the other big element of all of this is local sourcing. Because the more you can source locally, the less you're getting moved in, from away from wherever it is that you're working. And so trying to look and research local sourcing is an important component. Let's bounce over to Peter, because Peter is, quite knowledgeable in terms of alternative power sources and how that can integrate themselves into production.
Sure. So I titled this "If It's Better, Why Not?" And the challenge we're going to get into in a moment are the things that are keeping us from applying solutions that would use less fuel and have a lot of environmental and other production benefits. And so we're going to go through some challenges and opportunities and give you a really quick overview of what the existing equipment looks like and what some of the new things might be that are coming along. So let's go ahead and jump into this right away. So what are the benefits? If you switch to battery, the first thing is it's a lot cleaner. And it's not only just that it's cleaner, it's also quieter. So instead of having a big generator making a lot of noise and has to be cabled at a great distance, the batteries are nearly silent. But also the power is cleaner. It's much closer to grid power in terms of the stability of the power, in terms of powering the equipment and the lighting. You can then put it closer to set. You're going to save money on fuel. We talked about how much fuel we're burning on a single day. And, of course, with the fuel are all the emissions. So you're eliminating a substantial amount of that. And you have great efficiency. So why aren't we doing this? And let's take a look at some of the problems. So I own a rental house, and I can share with you from the perspective of this intermediary between having a solution that is great, but then having production that wants to use it. What are some of the challenges? Well, production looks at it, and there isn't a budget line for batteries. There's a budget line for generators, and the fuel sometimes ends up in a separate category. So when you put together the cost, it's not really that evident versus the cost of having a battery. The generator can run all day, and it can run into overtime. The battery has a limited run time. Generators are often portable. There's a challenge with recharging, just like with electric cars. The same technology, the same batteries, you've got how long is it going to run, and how long is it going to take me to recharge it. And those negatives can influence the production to actually include them. And then you've got job descriptions that need to change maybe from Jenny operator to power manager. But all those things have to be sort of worked through in order for there to be greater adoption. And over on the rental side, the rental house is saying, well, if production isn't sure they're going to rent it, how can we stock it? And can we get enough revenue if the budget lines are divided up to include this? And by the way, the technology is changing so rapidly. So all these negatives, there's a lot of future things coming that could make it better, including solid-state batteries that'll charge faster and run longer. But it doesn't mean that there aren't options today that are effective. And let's take a look at some of those. We have both small distributed power, like the Indy 5000, which is like the size of a Yeti cooler, and and some of these other units like the Salty Dog, which are quite portable and can be used in conjunction with camera and small lighting packages. And then you've got larger generators that are literally the size of a tow behind, and they can give you the power of a tow behind just for a shorter period of time. And the one picture there in the bottom corner is some of the technology that's coming out where there's technology to synchronize these units, where you can have a smaller unit that maybe doesn't have enough duration, but you can synchronize it with a second or third or fourth unit and extend that duration. So you've got flexibility on set to start to put together a package that will match up with your power needs. The other thing are hybrid solutions where you're powering a battery off of a generator. So the battery is providing power in base camp or on set for a couple of hours when people are around and it's quiet and it's doing the job, and then you're recharging it off of a generator, and that also can be synchronized. Scale-wise, these small units range from about a 2K that can run for a couple hours. Typically what you'll see is the batteries will run for twice the length of the amount of output they have available. So if you have a 12K battery, it's probably going to run for 2 hours at 12K, but if you manage your balance out your load, you can get more time out of it. So those small ones are very easy to use with camera, with small lighting packages. They've got great portability, and Declan's going to talk about that in a moment. And then the larger ones actually start to compete well with the generators. It's just the only thing holding them back tends to be the duration. And to that end, the hydro combo still has significant savings. If you combine a battery and a generator, all the time the battery's running, you're not wasting the fuel with the generator idling or running at low capacity. And you're not experiencing the noise and the pollution of that. And then the synchronization system that I mentioned. So moving on from there, let's take a look at a quick summary. One more thing that's coming. It's expensive, but might be a bigger solution is there are larger battery packages being put together now that are in the megawatt size. So now you have the ability to essentially bring grid to location with EV chargers and other things. This is happening now for large parking areas and that sort of thing in metro areas supporting the grid. But these too could become available for production. And then an industry resource topic for everybody to take a look at some point, we'll hear more about it, is the Clean Mobile Power Initiative. And for those in the California area, there's a big symposium coming up with that in a few weeks. So to quick summarize on that, there are lots of objections to keep batteries off of set, but there's lots of benefits that we could begin to integrate into production. And as we integrate them, we'll have a help with the learning curve. We will be reducing fuel consumption, we will be reducing emissions, and we will be gaining experience with using these alternate power systems.
Okay, so let's try to unpack that just a little bit. Meg, Declan, what are some of your... I know that Local 52 has been doing some training on battery packs and these things. From a gaffer's perspective, what are you thinking about? What is the dialogue and the conversation? A couple levels here. What is technically going on, and then what is the dialogue between cinematographer and the lighting department in terms of how do you plan this out? How do you implement it? And what are the issues that you run into with implementation?
So I would say that a lot of what Peter was showing has a lot of value on a set in terms of like base camp. There is, I mean, that is a place that is easily integrated into, that doesn't require any conversation with the DP at all. It just a matter of a conversation with production, seeing if you can get those technologies in there. But regarding when you're bringing the battery technologies to set, there's a question about, you know, what part of the budget does it come out of? Like, are we giving up part of the lighting budget to allow for smaller distributed power on set? Sometimes the batteries are necessary. If you're shooting in a subway, obviously that's a much easier option than trying to run off of the power that's available there. Like, sometimes it's a requirement. Sometimes it's about ease of use. If you're shooting some day exteriors and you're not going to use any big lights, like, obviously it's a great solution. You're friends with sound, friends with the environment, and they're not, the smaller batteries aren't that they don't cost as much as one might imagine to rent. But if you're talking about bigger lighting setups, like for any sort of like day interior where you need larger lights outside, or any night exteriors with spread out, larger units spread out farther from generators, it would be a bigger conversation. Like, how long are we going to be shooting? What size lights are we going to be using? Is this feasible, or do we need to talk about trying to incorporate the smaller batteries into maybe a remote lift if possible?
Yeah, and I think for the camera department and the DIT departments, the battery solution is exciting, that these new batteries are there, and we can work almost exclusively with battery power and not have to be attached necessarily to the electric side of the set. And on the lighting side, it's more complicated. As Meg said, if you're in bigger setups and you need to use power that's going to draw more lights that draw more power, then you have to kind of look at fuel generators and look at the traditional way of doing it. But if you're in kind of contained sets, there are arguments for batteries. If you're using simple lighting, our sensors on our new cameras go up to 2500 ISO, which allows us to shoot in very, very low light conditions. So sometimes we can take advantage of that and put a like a 2K size light outside a window and get a sun effect from it or something strong from it. So you can work at that level and work almost off all battery if necessary. The duration is getting better on like Astera tubes and vortexes that can be run by batteries and things like that. So I think with the Gaffer and the DP, you kind of make those calls. You try and make those calls in pre-production, not on the set on the day. You decide how you're going to package certain sets. Some sets you might deal with battery, and other sets you will deal with regular power. And if you're in a studio, you'll have that power. The other side of it is that there's this big boom in LED lighting, which allows us to consume less electricity and to have more output of light, which is great. It means we're not drawing as much power generally anyway. And I think that it also saves us on other sides, like gels, not having to use gels, and a lot of consumables that have been quite costly in the past. So there's savings on that level too.
I would like to say, though, that the lighting, the generators that we use on set for lighting are not like the only generators that exist. Like, there's a lot of places where these hybrid technologies might come into play, like or even be avoided having to use so many generators. Base camp locations, not having set shooting in a location where every truck requires an air conditioner on it, which definitely requires diesel plants, having solar on top of your base camp. If your holding location requires additional power, I mean, there's things that can be done by the locations department or any other department to help mitigate the need to have diesel plants on set. Sometimes, a diesel plant might be unavoidable for lighting, but there are places that other departments can do to help reduce their need for it. And sometimes it's just, finding a better spot for base camp or a place to hold your background that doesn't need additional electricity or hair and makeup. They consume a lot when they're washing machines and their blow dryers and stuff. Like, it's a lot.
So, what do you guys get into when you're trying to have this dialogue with production? Because it's a very interesting situation. There are some studios that are starting to be very committed towards certain environmental impact goals. So they can push from the top, but what happens from the crew side coming from the bottom, because it's hard for a producer. They have their way of budgeting, they have their way of thinking, they have methods that they feel comfortable with. This stuff works, this is the way I've been shooting for the last 15 years. I understand how it's going to happen. And then all of a sudden there are these changes, and with changes come unknowns. So how do you guys deal with that?
As a DP, I think you have to kind of approach it right at the beginning, even when you're doing the interview to get hired, to kind of just express your interest in trying to be sustainable and try and, who are you going to get somebody involved to coordinate this, ask those kind of questions as you kind of get hired first and try and encourage, that kind of thinking. And then when it comes to the scouting, just think along the lines of what Meg was talking about, like just in terms of what's efficient in terms of setting up base camps and things like that. Even though that's not a big part of what I do, I think more of that now than I used to in the past. And I think just trying to, talking to the producer about changing the way maybe they're used to having certain line items for lighting. And like you say, the generator is one cost, and then the fuel is in a totally other budget. But you have to marry the two together to really get the real sense of what's being spent for that power. And similarly with newer technology, dimmer boards, which you work with some producers who are like, why do you need a dimmer board? It's like, why do you need LED lights? They're twice as much as the tungsten lights. And so you have to kind of have a sit down, with them and kind of explain that this new technology is saving, it's greener, all those things. And so you have to do that in a kind of gracious way, try and educate where you need to. And also, what I'm learning is that now that the studios, if I'm working on a studio thing, if there's a sustainability coordinator from the studio who's involved with the production, to try and pull them in and engage them as much as possible, and then have somebody on set who is a kind of a sustainability kind of liaison who can talk to different departments and get daily information about what's needed and things like that. I think I haven't seen a production successfully do that myself. I know it happens in some cases, but I think more of that needs to happen. That would be to try and get. Because the crew themselves, I think for years we've had sustainability pushes for 20 years, trying to recycle things properly and cut fuel costs. But a lot of times we don't see that it really makes a difference, and we're still throwing the garbage all in the same place, and we're still idling 10 trucks on the road because it's winter and everybody needs to stay warm. We're not kind of figuring out those things, and so people get a little cynical about it, and so sometimes you have to fight that a little bit. And if you try and engage every department early on in the pre-production process and just try and set up a simple system of checking in with each other, I think that's a step toward sustainability generally.
And I would add to that is that what we're really talking about is changing behavior. And so one of the ways to address that is in small steps. So Camera's always had experience with distributed power. We can add more of that. And I think if you start to add batteries into production, even in a small scale, you're going to learn that it's not that it's just good for the environment, it's good for the crew. It's quiet, it doesn't have noxious fumes, And as a result, it's easier to put closer to production. So the idea of starting to integrate some battery power into production, there are many production benefits that come with that. And that will help, I think, to start to change some behavior and say, okay, well, if this is working on a lighting set, can we expand it to a bigger lighting grid, for instance?
Yeah, and just to tack on to that as well, I couldn't agree more. And as somebody whose job it is to try to influence these decisions to be made, I would have to double down on what you said, Declan, about like the earlier the better is so important. And then understanding that like this is a multi-department conversation, right? And so the way we try to approach it is we have a power planning meeting as early as possible. We can get the DP there, great. It's rare. But certainly the gaffer, the Best Boy Electric, the rigging gaffer, the locations manager, all of these people have sway and influence over how power is going to be distributed and what power draws are going to be. And so when we get information from them, we can actually help run the analysis and say, okay, you're looking at this lighting package, and if you switch to LEDs, you would see this savings. Like, we're going to show you what that looks like by making the change in real time, like what those numbers come out to be, right? So then we can help empower those department heads to have those conversations and bring in the UPMs and producers with that as well, because the hardest things are when we get into the creative decision-making aspect. Meg, to your point, it's like, oh, it's base camp, it's not on camera, do whatever you want, just make sure things run. But when there's creativity behind it, decisions about what lighting to use, decisions about what location to shoot at. Maybe you're debating between two locations. One's more aesthetically aligned with what the production wants, but it doesn't have grid power access, and one is not as aligned but does have grid power access where we can actually tie into the grid and avoid generators altogether. Like, these are the kinds of conversations that I think are hard but necessary to really engage the creative decision makers in what it is we're trying to do and empower and equip them with the knowledge and the numbers to help influence those decisions.
Let's see here. In terms of what you're doing, your areas of impact in terms of the stuff that you're working with, and what do you lead production through? What are the sections that when you start this meeting, what are the areas that you're going to focus on with them?
Absolutely. Yeah. So as you can see here, these are our core areas of impact we look at with every production at Earth Angel. Different productions, as I like to say, sustainability is a spectrum. Some productions are going to excel really well in some areas. Some productions are going to lag in others. It's so contingent on where you're shooting, what's available regionally, what the level of enthusiasm is with your producers and UPMs and department heads. But really, this is when we work with a production, we're focused on education. How are we going to inform, engage crew on what it is we're doing and empower them, like I mentioned. Our waste reduction and waste diversion, keeping as much waste out of landfills as possible. Our energy consumption, trying to reduce that as much as we can. Our fuel consumption, as we've all talked about. Sustainable sourcing. We buy a lot of stuff over the course of a show, whether that's props, set deck, camera, wardrobe. If we can help influence those dollars to be going towards more sustainable, certified vendors versus not, that's obviously a huge win because we vote every day with our dollars. Community impact. This is a big one. Going back to the diesel generators, this is a huge complaint, especially when we're shooting in urban environments. I am a resident of Brooklyn and had a huge diesel generator parked outside of my house not that long ago, many months ago, and I was like, this is terrible. Like, we have to figure out a better solution for this, like not just for the crew members, but for the community members who are being impacted by the footprint that we're leaving. And so how do we be mindful of that and be better stewards? And then last but not least is reporting. You can't manage what you don't measure. And so we have a really strong emphasis on tracking a variety of different metrics. I showed you some, but there's many, many more because, again, the data really talks when we're trying to influence that. This is kind of how we structure our solutions. We have like our on-the-ground team members, which are eco supervisor, eco coordinator, and eco rep. So we kind of model that, like the way a lot of other departments are structured. We try to emulate that to, assimilate into production world as much as possible. But then behind the scenes, we have other specialized roles that are focused on material recovery, on the analytics, on the staffing and education, and on our overarching strategy and decarbonization. So that kind of like behind the scenes people kind of feeding the on the ground folks the information and resources we found to be very effective. And here's some of our impact stats to date. There's many, many more. And this is just the sample size of productions that we've worked with. But there's a lot more work to do and impact to be had for sure.
So this really comes down to, again, building a culture and conducting the dialogue. What has, Meg, in terms of Local 52, in terms of, you guys have several departments other than just lighting. What kind of things are happening with the Sustainability Committee? What are the different areas that are being focused on?
It's a lot of like end of show waste recycling, and just trying to empower the members to be able to talk to productions about how to make their the jobs that they're on more sustainable. Working on a green 401k plan was in the works.
A green 401k plan. What does that look like?
I couldn't tell you.
Okay.
This is not my work here.
All right. It's a work in progress.
Yeah,
there you
finances
go.
is not anything.
Yeah.
It's about divesting from fossil fuels.
There you go.
Well,
Excellent. Excellent. So anyhow, let's see here. Some resources here in New York, because part of it is starting local. And so this is a good slide. Grab a quick picture of it. And I've got another one here. This is something that the Local 600 Sustainability Committee has put together. If you grab a shot of this, it will take you to a fairly comprehensive list of educational and practical resources. I see a camera up. Okay, I'm going to go back to the previous one for folks who didn't get the shot of that. All right. So I'm famous for pushing times, so we're gonna push them on their time a little bit. Do we have any questions? We've got quite a group of experts here with significant experience. Any questions out there at all? Sure. Go ahead.
How do you convince someone who's maybe a non-union production where they don't have the budget? Because from what I've heard before, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but green sustainability things are more expensive in some ways. So how do you convince them to go green?
I can take this if nobody else wants to. Okay. So yes, there are certain premiums associated with certain sustainability measures. We heard about this earlier in terms of like it's not a one-for-one kind of cost measurement when we're talking about a battery versus a diesel generator, right? Because without factoring in the fuel cost, which is a different line, we're obviously saving a ton on fuel. But if you look at that one-for-one comparison, yes, a similar battery unit is going to be more expensive. So it requires some creativity when it comes to like cost benefit analyses, and we've put in a lot of effort into cost benefit analyses. But I will say for just smaller, lower budget, non-union productions, they're sort of inherently more sustainable because they have to do more with less. They're sort of like forced to. But I think at a bare minimum, I would actually look to, like what the Daniels did with Everything Everywhere All at Once. Like that was a pretty low budget production, and they were able to achieve a lot, like really independently, just by like, again, you had the creatives on board and they infused an ethos of like, this is important to us and we're gonna make this happen. Even if that's like green facts of the day going out on your call sheets, memos to inform people about, you know, where we're shooting and how to properly dispose of their waste. Like, even if you can't go the full 9 yards of like, we got as close to decarbonizing as possible, you know, everybody can do something, eliminating single-use plastics, right? Like there's a lot of different ways, and then all the resources that were shared here. The greenproductionguide.com is another really great resource that, you know, any production of any level can start somewhere with one of these areas of impact. And what's great is that there's so many people who've done a lot of this work that you can also leapfrog over their learnings. And I've certainly made a lot of mistakes along the way, and I don't want people wasting time because the planet doesn't have time to waste. So I'm like, learn from our mistakes. Here's some of the ways that you can, you know, help accelerate that change.
One of the things that you can leverage, and it works quite well, we've noticed that some of the early efforts on sustainability was driven by actors. And so, you know, even on the lower budget productions, if your top 3 lines in the call sheet are saying, hey, we really want to see this to be a sustainable effort, that's going to carry a lot of weight with production. You know, they're going to try to accommodate. Do I have time for one more question?
Yes, because we're sustainable here as well. So who has us?
And while you're looking for that question, I'll just add on a little bit about how to work with a smaller production, and it applies to all, is that the equipment list for the rental house often is very late in the decision tree, and it's often a shopping list. So if the shopping list is a copy and paste of the last shopping list, it's not going to make change. So if you can start a little earlier thinking about maybe changing the lighting package to have a little lower lighting draw so that you can work with a battery instead of a small tow-behind generator. There are things like that that can happen by starting the planning process earlier. And maybe it's a small impact, but it'll get things moving in the right direction.
There's also quite a bit that can be done that doesn't involve like changing your lighting package or your size of generators. Like there's a lot that jobs can do to reduce their carbon footprint. Making sure that there's vegan options available at catering is really macroeconomically sustainable, and also meat eaters like to eat vegetables. You can encourage everybody to bring their own water bottles, even if you're not completely taking them off of set. Having LED lights might be more expensive, but also it initially, but like if you know, older like incandescent bulbs, units require heavier cable, more crew, and larger generators to be able to power them. So you just got to look at how kind of weigh that out and get your crew involved earlier in the conversations. It's not just about even though I am really invested in lighting, it's a lot that can be done that isn't just about getting rid of generators and lights.
And it's also the air conditioning budget on incandescent, is significant.
Yeah, getting people to set. If your locations are close to a train, that's less people that have to drive there. Encouraging people to carpool, making message boards for people who do want to carpool. I mean, there's a lot that can be done to reduce your footprint that doesn't cost a dime.
I was curious, similar to the tax incentives that we see coming from certain regions to try to encourage people to shoot there, do we see any incentives or requirements coming from cities or regions in terms of shooting sustainably?
Well, one place we're seeing that is in the tax credits and grants available for the equipment. So, for instance, California has very high incentives for putting batteries into the market, whether it's for construction, live events, or film, and those credits are big enough to change the gap between the cost of a battery and the cost of a generator. So significant impact in California. We've seen a lot less of that here in the Northeast. So you're starting to see a little bit more of that, but it does make a big difference.
There are other countries that are incentivizing sustainable production as well. Austria was one of the kind of first to put out an uplift on, in terms of like film tax credits, putting an uplift on if you meet certain sustainability criteria, you can qualify for additional tax rebate. So certainly that's a model that I think a lot of people are looking to and interested in, because that, dangling the carrot rather than the stick is a really effective way to get everybody on board. So it's something that I think a lot of major states that are production hubs, I think, are starting to look at and could be a really interesting accelerator for sure.
Okay, so for a close, I have one more question.
No, Michael, we have to keep sustainable with the labor contracts at Javits. So can you wrap?
You're tossing us out. Okay, I was just real quickly, Declan. What changes have you seen across the last 20 years? You've been shooting for a good period of time at this point, and are you seeing more sensitivity? Is there a growth?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a big growth. I think that people are much more conscious of it as the next generation comes up and it becomes more important to them. Obviously, the future. There's a real sensitivity to it. I think most people on crews really want to make a difference. They just need help coordinating and figuring out how to make it happen. When you're on a crew, you can't do it as an island. You have to have everybody doing it together. And technology-wise, it's really exciting what's happening with technology in terms of using low-power units and having great color control and dimmer control of lights. It's made a big difference, and it's greener too than what we had 15, 20 years ago. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, I know you guys had, thank you very much for giving us your time. You had choices. You chose to be here. That's really nice. Thank you very much.